Hello, and today we're going to be reviewing the Ryobi P739 1-gallon 18-volt air compressor. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, starting off at the bottom of the tool, we have the 3 rubber feet. Now, I was a little bit skeptical when I saw there were only 3 feet instead of 4, but it actually works fairly well, and I didn't have any issues with the air compressor or vibrating itself off any work surface that I had it sitting on. As a matter of fact, it stayed right where I put it, no matter what surface I put it on. And the fact that the rubber feet also give the air compressor a little bit of height is another added bonus. So quite frankly, I'm perfectly satisfied with the rubber feet, and they did a good job. So yeah, moving on. Okay, next up we have the moisture release valve located on the bottom of the compressor. This is going to be a useful feature for, well, making the life of your compressor much longer and, well, just also saving you some headaches in the future. If you know anything about air compressors, if you operate them in a humid environment or in a damp environment or anywhere that just has excess water hanging around, there's a good chance you're going to get some buildup on the inside of the tank, and eventually that's going to cause rust and, well, in the life of your compressor. So the fact they decided to include a release valve is very nice. Now, the one area on this release valve that I would change would be the handle. The handle is made out of plastic, and plastic just has a nasty habit of failing, especially when it's on a, well, handle. So quite frankly, I would change this to metal, but other than that, there's really nothing wrong with this release valve, and it works as intended. So yeah, it gets a pass from me. And next up we have the air release valve. The air release valve is located on top of the tool behind the green handle and will allow you to release air from the tank when you are finished using the air compressor, or if you just need to release air from the air compressor for some strange reason. It's completely adequate, it's made out of metal, and it has a fairly decent pull tab which is easy to access and shouldn't have any major issues. So as far as I'm concerned, it's adequate and gets a pass. Moving on. And next up we have the battery slot. The battery slot is located on the rear of the tool and will allow you to use Ryobi 18-volt batteries with this tool. The slot itself is fairly decent. I like the location and I like the angle of which the batteries sit. It keeps them from falling out accidentally if you don't insert them fully. And, well, quite frankly, the batteries fit in and lock in fairly nice. There's a little bit of wiggling, but no more than what you'd find on other tools on the market in this price category. Now, with that being said, I really would have preferred to see maybe a little bit longer battery life. This thing is going to be able to recharge itself around 9 times with a 4 amp hour battery, but your usage may vary, especially if you're using a knockoff 4 amp hour battery and not an official Ryobi battery. So just keep that in mind. Now, with that being said, let's go ahead and move on to the next feature on this tool. And next up we have the power switch. The power switch is located in between the battery slot and the tank of the air compressor and is fairly large in size. This means that it's easily accessible with your bare hands or with work gloves, depending on what kind of situation you're in. So the switch itself is going to be a rocker style switch. The upward position will be your on position and the lower position will be your off position. And, well, quite frankly, that's about the size of it. It's perfectly adequate, it gets the job done, and it's not going to get accidentally turned off if you bump the air compressor against something. So as far as I'm concerned, everything here is, well, perfectly fine. Moving on. And next up we have the universal push to connect quick coupler. This is a fairly standard design, and there really is nothing exceptional to write home about here. It's completely adequate and it'll get the job done. I would have liked to have seen maybe a little bit of a raised ridge at the rear of the coupler just so it was a little bit easier to work with, but as far as I'm concerned, it's still, well, acceptable. The one thing you do need to remember is that this compressor does not come with any air hoses, and those will have to be purchased separately, and they can range anywhere from around $10 all the way up to, well, very, very expensive. So just keep that in mind if you are looking to purchase this particular compressor. And next up we have the air hose storage rack, hangers, storage area, whatever you want to call it. They're made out of metal and they're going to be very useful for when you need to transport your air compressors to and from. Now, this is going to be more useful with a standard air hose. If you're using a collapsible air hose like I am in the video, it's not going to be nearly as effective, but it still does help out. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on. And next up we have the locking regulator. Now, the regulator on this particular tool is adequate, but in my opinion there are some things that need improvement. It's perfectly fine when it comes to the overall shape, the grip, and ability to turn. It turns easily, you can pull it out from the locked position easily, and it seems to do a decent job at being fairly precise. The area that I'm not a huge fan of is when you try to lock it back into the lock position. It can be a little bit fiddly and it doesn't always lock into place as smoothly as it should. So that's just something you need to keep in mind. For me personally, I almost always have this set at the maximum amount of pressure, so that's just how I use this air compressor. I use it for cleaning different objects, and I usually need as much pressure as I can possibly get. So your use may vary, but for me personally, this is just not an area of the tool I use a whole lot. But it still gets the job done, so it passes. And next up we have the dials. Now the dials on this particular air compressor are a fairly standard, well, design here. You have one for the tank, you have one for the outlet, and it goes up by 30. So you start out at 0 and you end at 210, which is a little odd since this can only operate up to 120 pounds of pressure, so it's a little bit weird in my opinion. And I personally would have liked to have seen maybe it go up by 10s instead of 30s, or at least 20s. So, I don't know, it seems like this is an interesting design choice, but for me personally, it's not exactly the method I would have went with. The dials are analog, so if you're looking for a digital readout, you're out of luck here. And they seem to be fairly accurate, although for me personally, I like having a dedicated gauge to actually tell what my pressure is doing when I hook this compressor up to, say, a tire or something. For using it with a nailer or stapler, you shouldn't have any issues, although for me personally that seems like kind of a waste of time since the capacity of the tank is so small. But with that being said, let's go ahead and move on to the storage tank itself. Okay, moving on to the air tank. Now the air tank on this particular compressor is very well constructed, but the capacity is very limiting. You will be able to run small air power tools such as, light duty air staplers or light duty air nailers, and you will be able to inflate a car tire. It's just not going to be the best experience, and it will take this compressor a while. I really wish Ryobi would have went with a 2-gallon air tank instead of the 1-gallon air tank, but it is what it is, and it does work for my particular needs, although I do have to do quite a bit of waiting around for the compressor to, well, get the air tank back up to capacity. You're going to be looking at a wait time of around 2 minutes from completely empty to full at 120 psi, and you're going to be looking at around 1 minute of wait time when you use this to the point where the motor kicks on. So overall, this isn't going to be the best option for a lot of people, but if you have a limited option for powering a compressor, this is a reasonable compressor to take a look at. But if I had to do it over again, I probably would have went with the Hart compressor, which has a 2-gallon air tank. So yeah, if you're not sure if this is going to work for you, if you're looking to inflate car tires, I would look at a inflator and not a compressor. And if you're looking to run, say, an air power tool like a pin nailer or a stapler, this will get the job done, but just not very well. If you are looking to inflate, let's say, riding lawnmower tires or bicycle tires, this will work just fine. Or if you want to use it as a giant air duster, that will work fairly well for that purpose as well. And next up we have the carrying handle. Now the carrying handle on this particular tool is made out of metal and has a very nice rubberized overgrip that is easy to grip barehanded if your hands are slick or wet, and will provide you plenty of, well, room for if you need to wear gloves while gripping this particular tool as well. So the handle is completely adequate. It's also very well balanced, and I don't have any issues carrying this over distances, and it's easy to carry as long as you've got the arm strength. And that's going to be important because this is kind of a weighty little tool, but we'll cover that here in a second. So when it comes to the handle, it's completely adequate and I don't have any complaints. Moving on. Okay, now without a battery, the compressor weighs 6,335 grams, which is about 14 pounds. And with a 4 amp hour battery, it weighs 7,051 grams, which is about 15.5 pounds. So it's definitely on the weighty side. But to be fair, that is perfectly normal for a compressor to be heavy. Okay, let's go through the pros and cons real quick. 18 volt. Having an 18 volt compressor can be super useful in a variety of situations, so in my opinion this is a pro. Sturdy. Overall this is a sturdy little compressor and will definitely survive a knock or two, which means this is a pro in my opinion. Hose storage. Having hose storage is going to be very useful and is going to be one of those features that you would definitely miss if it didn't have it, so this is a pro in my opinion. Balanced. Overall this is a balanced little compressor, which means carrying it is not nearly as hard as one might think, so as far as I'm concerned this is a pro. Good handle. Overall the handle on this particular tool is just about as good as it can possibly be. It's enclosed, it has a nice rubberized grip, and there's plenty of room to get your hands in even if you're wearing gloves, so as far as I'm concerned this is a pro. Water drain valve. Having the water drain valve is a very nice little feature and will definitely prolong the life of the tool, especially if you live in a humid environment. And the first meh would be the battery life. The battery life, it's decent, but it's not great. It's not so bad that it's a con, but it's not so good that it's a pro. It's just kind of meh. And the next meh would be the size. Now the size isn't bad. It's definitely bulky and it's definitely heavy, but I really think that you could have added a bigger tank for just a slightly larger form factor. So as far as I'm concerned, the size is just kind of meh. And the first con is the 1 gallon tank. The 1 gallon tank is just not usable in a lot of situations. There's just not enough air storage to really make this a very usable tool, and I really think that Ryobi would have benefited from having a bigger tank. So as far as I'm concerned, this is a con. And the next con would be no hose included. Considering the price you're paying for this tool, them including a cheap $10 hose would not be that hard of an ask. And because they didn't include it, I'm going to say that's a con. Loud. Yeah, this is very loud. That's standard for air compressors, but because of the size, I would have thought it might have been a little bit quieter, but it's not. So make sure you pack that air protection. No AC power. Not having an AC power point is definitely a bummer on this particular tool. Considering the size and the price, I really think they could have stuck an AC power port on here somewhere, and it would have definitely made this a much more attractive tool in a variety of situations. So this is a con in my opinion. Price. Overall, this is an expensive tool, coming in at $180, which is definitely on the high side. You can find Hart or Bauer models marked down a lot of the time for closer to $100 or $130. So quite frankly, at the end of the day, I would highly recommend doing some shopping around if you were able to. If you have Ryobi batteries, you're kind of out of luck and this is your only option. And that is it for the pros and cons. Final thoughts on this particular product. Overall, I have a need for a tool like this, but I don't think the vast majority of people who need an air compressor are going to be very happy with this particular tool. If you're aware of its shortcomings and you don't mind this 1 gallon size tank, it will do what it's supposed to do, and the build quality is actually pretty good. If you need something with a lot more capacity, say for running nail guns or something, you're going to definitely want something that's a little bit larger than this particular compressor. But with that being said, if you do need a battery operated compressor and you're in the Ryobi system, this is your only option. And as long as you know what you're dealing with the capacity and its limitations, it's not a bad little tool. And I personally find it to be very useful in a variety of situations, like not having to buy canned air. This is going to be very useful for, well, being basically a giant duster for blowing dust out of computer or electronic components, which is basically what I pretty much exclusively use this tool for. So as long as you understand what you're getting into, this tool does come recommended. And that wraps up this video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe, and we will see you next time. God bless.